Good morning, everybody. This is Walk the Dog with Riot Mort. It is Monday morning, about 5:45, and it is the month of June. Kids get out of school in a week and a half, which is wild. Time marches on, and I just got over a good weekend. The streams went well. The big thing for me was not really caring about what place I got. That mattered a lot. We had some fun getting second places, stuff like that. I definitely had less first than I would have liked, as far as like if I were stressing about tubers, but since I didn't care, and there were some really fun games where I was on the losing end of somebody getting a 3-star 5 cost or stuff like that. So overall, it was a fun weekend. Um, yeah, also did some family stuff. And so, today is prep patch 14.6 day. I actually went ahead and did that yesterday because I have a lot of meetings today. And looks like it'll be a pretty small patch. I think players will be excited for one of the big system reworks I did. Keeps things light and should just be a big win. And then we're starting to double up's the other big thing that I don't know it'll get in this patch or next patch, or hopefully next patch. But double up the 3-star 4 cost has been an issue. So get that. By the way, congrats to one of my mods actually just hit Challenger in double up. So that was pretty wild. That's a truck. So that's pretty wild. So yeah. All right. We have a lot of questions today, so I'm not gonna talk too much here because there's a lot of questions, and some of them are easy, some of them are a little trickier. Okay, first question. This one's okay. What are my thoughts on having a selector for a trait like, say, Syndicate, as opposed to it auto-picking strongest for something like Cyberboss? Okay, so generally, we know 100% that a selector is going to be easier, but it does make the trait a little more complicated. Because, for example, it's a very common thing. That's a loud bird. It's a very common thing for people to like forget to use the selector or put it in a weird spot. But at the high level, there's actually a really simple rule that we start with, which is if it should sort of naturally go to the thing that makes sense, we choose strongest. Otherwise, if there's actually a unique different output that you can strategize around, then it should be a selector. So in the case of Syndicate, if you're running a Braum, Twisted Fate, Darius, you have the choice of, do I want this on my carry or do I want this on my tank, right? Like, that is an interesting choice. Neither is necessarily better or worse. That's the logic. And so a selector is used, right? And so, like, if you remember Dragonmancer back in the day, it was sort of like, who has the unique output that you want? But in Cyberboss's case, and again, I'm not necessarily defending this because, to be honest with you, Cyberboss being a selector probably just would have been easier. But the idea was, like, Cyberboss, you're playing early game, Poppy and Vagar, and it just gives stats for the most part. It gives stats and makes their spell a little better. But whoever you have the items on is probably who you want to be the Cyberboss, especially because they're early cost units and things like that, was kind of the logic. And so, if you put your items on Poppy as opposed to Vagar, it should switch to your strongest. Plus, there was a little bit of thematicness around, like, hey, here's these 4, like, Cyberboss villains, and whichever one's the strongest becomes the big evil boss, right? Like, there was some thematic tension there. And then the final thing is just that generally, I don't really want to ship a set that has 2 selectors. Now, again, should that have meant, well, we shouldn't have shipped Cyberboss or come up with a different design for it? Yeah, maybe, to be honest. But that's generally the high-level rule. When we're doing the initial paper design, usually you try to limit it to one trait that has a selector, so that you don't end up in these weird situations where Especially because two cyber bosses, if you remember at the start of the set, like everyone was playing two cyber bosses so that you could have Kobuko plus Ziggs. But the idea that imagine if you were playing Kobuko plus Ziggs, and then also Misfortune Dynamo Flex, so having multiple selectors just seemed like a bit of a problem. So now strongest is one of those things that, like, if players don't know, if you know about it, it's actually a really simple rule, right? Like whatever the most recent one you put in, no problem. Though it's funny because it does create situations where I'll get messages where it's like, hey, I was playing no scout, no pivot cyber boss, and I couldn't switch who my strongest was. And it's like, yeah, that's not a great experience. It's definitely something we should avoid. Now, part of it, there's the player responsibility of, well, maybe don't play no scout, no pivot cyber boss. But I get it, I get it. So, like I said, if it were infinite time, infinite design, I would say cyber boss should have just been a different rule. But, yeah. So, anyway, in future sets, though, like I said, it's generally one selector. And the other thing I'll say is that generally, I don't think we're really happy with the concept of strongest. We've tried it a couple times, but it just hasn't been as intuitive as we want. So, I think in future designs, for the most part, we're staying away from strongest. Yeah, I'm trying to think. There might be one trait that I'd have to go double check if it's still using it or not, but I don't think it is. So, yeah, strongest is TLDR here. Selector better, strongest not so much, but only one selector per set is kind of the high level. So, yeah, all right. What are my general thoughts on 4v4 and its optimizations and the way it's played? Okay, so quick caveat here, just so we're 100% clear. I'm not the esports team. I don't make any esports decisions. I have no influence whatsoever. If I said 4v4 was the worst thing ever, which I'm not saying that, but if I said that, the esports team could totally make 4v4 the main format and nothing I can do is stop it, So, now, with that caveat out of the way, what I will say is 4v4 is a really interesting, high-level strategic thing that can never, in my opinion, be the main thing. But if you're like a super-duper turbo PvP nerd, it's actually really fun. I think some of those optimizations where it's like, who's going to be the person that like sacks around, who's going to be people that like holds units of other people, like, it's pretty cool. There's some like really deep strategic depth to 4v4. And for a lot of the people who play 4v4 who really, really like 4v4, TFT, if you're like a competitive player, can be a pretty isolating experience where you're just sitting there playing the game by yourself over and over, grinding. And if you lose, you can get in your own head, seconds can feel terrible. Like it can do some things to you mentally. But in 4v4, if things are going well, you've got 3 other people to share with you. If you have that game where you're low rolling, you can still bring advantages to the team. It's pretty skill expressive because the balance can actually end up decent. Though I will say, if you look at how it was played at the Double Digis event, that meta wasn't great for that. So even it is susceptible to a pretty imbalanced meta, which isn't great. But, at the end of the day, though, the reality is, if it became like the main mode or anything like that, no one new would ever show up in the TFT community again. And that is a big miss. The aspirations of being able to play the game, get good at it by yourself and somehow make it, would be gone. So, the other thing is that 4v4 has a lot of what I'll call unnatural things that aren't intuitive from a game design standpoint, but it's okay because these are some of our hardcore players. Like, it's literally a mode invented just for our hardcore players, right? Like, I think a lot of people's initial reaction is that you shouldn't face your allies. It's like, well, no. Facing your allies is what adds the strategic depth. So, stuff like that. It's interesting. What I will say, though, is also as a spectator, even Froden hasn't really got it right. Like, the ability to tell the narrative in Well People Are is so complicated that it's, really tough. Now, granted, like this and last weekend, it was because you can't actually spectate, but not being able to hear the comms, all that stuff. So, I don't know. It's cool, and, the people who like 4v4 really like 4v4. I get it. But, man, could you imagine if we released that mode to the public? It would go so poorly. So poorly. Most people cannot and do not want to think about the game in that way. And the toxicity it would bring. Because, man, a lot of the toxicity of PvP games comes from team games because you can blame somebody else. We talked about that on a previous walk. So, yeah. It's such a narrow, I don't know. I bet if you asked a lot of the 4v4 people who played that didn't win, it's like, do you really, really enjoy this mode? They'd be like, it's fine. It's cool. It's cool to play with 3 people I like and have comms. But, you have to do some really weird things. So, but, again, we know, for example, like the Vitality folks, they really like this mode. So. Yeah, I think that's kind of it. It's one of those things that, again, because the audience is so narrow and it not being the main mode, it's difficult for me to think about because it is what it is. It's not going to like radically transform esports, in my opinion. It exists. It's cool. I'm glad it exists. Should we spend the dev time to maybe give it a cool UI? Yeah, probably. But anything other than that, like, because again, your average player who plays at home, your average plat to master player is not going to enjoy this mode. They're not going to get the same things out of it that Vitality's getting out of it. That's just the reality of it. So, yeah, I don't know. Not much else to add. And then there's the whole EWC thing aspect of it that thankfully I have not had to be involved in. So, I don't know. But, yeah, I did see 100 Thieves didn't make it. So, that's pretty wild. And that's the other thing. There's only so many people who can make it. For everyone else, yeah. And now I will say what I'm really worried about is there's going to be this really awkward community divide where people are going to say, is Worlds the real skill expressor or is 4v4 the real skill expressor? And because of a certain group of people, I'm sure we'll start trying to spread that Worlds doesn't matter, which is really, really stupid. But then again, that wouldn't be not par for the course. So, yeah, we'll see. So anyway, that's my 4v4 thoughts. I will say I got to play some 4v4 in the Riot Rumble. It's like I said, it's fine. It's fun. So, okay. Rules about spellcast speed. So this is a question that comes up usually around things like set 12 Varus, set 14 Brand. Someone even brought up set 13 Powder, right? It's like spells that when their mana bar fills up, the spell has to have like a long animation, build up tension before it resolves. And there are some people that are like, hey, I lost the fight because during that spell build up and tension, I died and it feels bad. So why don't you just remove that? Why don't you have Powder's thing walk faster or Brand's Fireball travel faster? Okay. So this is a complicated one, but here's the real truth of this. Those long spell animations are why TFT is one of the key reasons why TFT is the best auto battler in the genre. Okay. Now you might be like, what the hell are you talking about? Okay. all the way back to Dota Auto Chess, Underlords, Dota Auto Chess, even Hearthstone Battlegrounds to an extent, though they're doing it intentionally. Super Auto Pets, all that stuff. We have one thing over them that they don't. TFT combat is fun to watch. Okay? It is very fun to watch. If you go watch some of like the China exclusive auto battlers, like the Pokemon one, and you watch those fights, oh my God, it is dull. It is just like units slowly bashing into each other. Eventually a spell V effect plays. You can barely tell what's happening, and some damage numbers pop up, and eventually units fade. It's dull. By comparison, we have explicitly said that TFT should feel like really active MOBA combat that feels fun to watch and has these moments of tension, right? Where it's like Zed is dodging fireballs and, here comes a big boom. So part of the design for TFT is not just the paper kit, right? The paper kit's the easy part. Where it's just like, this spell will do 500 damage base. Great. But another part of it is the feel, right? And this is something Giovanni's one of our best at on our team, is it's the feel of like, okay, I'm going to shoot this bolt, and when it hits, it has this impact feel that's like, bam, that looks like it really hurts. Or the travel time feels completely correct, or the tension of the Ari Spirit Bomb feels relative to the impact it has. All of that stuff has to be considered to make our game fun to watch. And so when done correctly, you get these really cool moments that it's just like, oh man, he dodged that, or oh, he just got out of the way, or oh, that just barely hit. That can make combat really exciting to watch. And sometimes you get these pop-off moments where it's like, you won by one anti-tibbers, or you killed them right before the projectile coming your way hit you in the face. That is really important. It's really important for game feel that pretty much none of the other auto battlers capture. And so when you look at something like Powder, it's like, again, it creates these cool moments where it's like, it tells a story where it's like, oh, here comes the thing. It's heading there. Oh, it's going to make a boom, that's a good thing for the game. Now, where that comes important is that it has to be accounted for when you're balancing the game. Now, let me give you an example. Let's say we have Brand here, and Brand is 70 mana, and then he throws the fireball, which I believe takes 1.5 seconds of travel time, I believe. I could be off there. It might be 1.25. What that means is during the travel time, that's essentially part of your spell cycle. Now, we could make that animation take longer, right? So let's say Brand's mana was 50, but that spell had a 2.5 or even 3-second travel time. From a mathematical damage output scenario, those two values are the same, right? It's like every 8 seconds, essentially, shoot out a 500 damage fireball. That's basically what it boils down to. Likewise, if we raised his mana to 80 and made the fireball travel really, really fast, let's say 0.25 seconds, just almost instantaneous, right? Kind of like a Zeri shot. We just shoot fireballs that fast. That also does 500 damage every 8 seconds or so, right? Like, from a balance perspective, they're all equally possible and can give you the same results. So, that doesn't change much. It's just a question of, does Brand shooting a fireball that travels in 0.25 seconds, does that actually feel good? Probably not. It probably looks way too fast. You can't track it with your eye. And you're like, oof, that doesn't make sense. And not to mention, if every single spell in the game is traveling like Zeri shot speed, does that look good? No, it looks terrible. It looks like a boring auto battler. And so having these spells that do have that tension and that animation that makes it feel like cool combat is important. Now, that's not to say we're executing on it perfectly, right? Like, and this is one of those things that, again, not everyone on the team quite has Giovanni's skills, but combat feel can be hard to get right, you know? In Brand's case, you know, the combination of like the travel time plus the fizzle protection plus what you do when you resolve that fizzle protection and how long that should take, not to mention like, hey, maybe the main fireball travel speed is fine, but the splash travel speed is like really slow and we should speed that up. Or, you know, like it's a lot of detail oriented things that you have to think about when you look at that spell that could be better, right? Like I'm not trying to claim it's perfect, but I am trying to claim that stuff like that is necessary. And it's up to balance to make sure it feels powerful enough to warrant it. Now, no matter what we do, like let's say the animations are perfect, the balance is perfect, it does, 1,000 damage and it feels good. Let's say we do all of that. There will still be these moments where the way the combat resolves is as Brand is beginning to cast, he dies to a Zeri shot, and you go, well, damn, I raised the mana, but I didn't get the benefit. That feels bad. It's true. But that's one of those examples where it's like, yes, losing does feel bad. You're right. But it's still part of the spell. It still has to be there. And I wouldn't change it, So, yeah. So, like I said, I don't think everything needs to be like that. But travel time, combat feel is an important part of the auto-battler genre for us. They're important. And, yeah. But the other thing we've learned is that a tiny difference can make a world of difference, right? If, let's say, Brand's travel time is 1.25 seconds, and I'm sitting here using hyperbolic, well, like it can't be 0.25. Well, clearly. But what if it's 1.1? What if it's 1.05, right? Like, do those feel better? They might. Something I learned at Nintendo, I always remember that conversation where Mr. Tanabe yelled at us. All we were doing was talking about Mini Mario walk speed. And I think it was like 0.4 pixels per second. And he's like, did you try 0.35? And we were like, no, we tried 0.3 and 0.4, and we thought 0.4 felt better. He's like, well, what about 0.35? What about 0.45? We're like, yeah, we didn't try those because those feel better. He's like, how can you know if you haven't tried them all? If you're going for feel, you have to try everything so that you know for sure this is the best solution. And it can be time consuming, but he's right, And so I'm not the one who worked on Brand, but I can tell you that I didn't try a faster travel time. I didn't try a slower travel time. I can't tell you with 100% certainty that this is the best travel time speed. But my expectation is that whatever designer was working on it, that is something they did, right? And when you own a piece of content, you have to be so familiar with that piece of content that you understand all the intricacies and you understand all the possibilities so that you are the world's expert on Brand and his fireball travel time. Powder with the monkey. It's like, well, if it walks faster, it looks weird and doesn't look natural. But if it walks slower, oh my God, it's a dread, So you have to weigh those. And it will come down to a subjective call. But at least if you know the answer and why you made that subjective call, you can explain it. So, okay, yeah. So TLDR here. Combat animation speeds matter because combat feel is important. Game needs to feel lively and like a world of people fighting, not just boring spreadsheet of people punching each other for number. Doubt it's all perfect, but will you see more spells in the future that have long windups? Absolutely. Absolutely you will, because they're important and they feel good. They add tension. They're exciting. And it's up to us to make sure they feel right and the balance is relative to that power. But if it's not, even if it is, there will always be some slight feels bad moments. part of the game. So there you go. All right, I think I got time for one more. I'm not going to get to the items one. All right. Why is there hardly any crit scaling interactions? We haven't seen any crit scaling interactions since set 10. This one's an interesting one in that if I were to ask most of the designers on my team, the answer would probably be no reason. We could probably add some. Not a big deal. But what I will say is I don't like crit interactions for our game. Crit is already an inherently weird system. And we actually had to talk about this internally. But if you think about it, at its like a simple, most rudimentary level, if I have two units fighting each other, do I want the outcome of that fight determined by whether or not one unit crit or not? Not really. I'd rather it be determined by their strength, their multipliers, their, stuff like that. Having crit be this like wild variable does lead to some pretty crazy RNG. And I don't necessarily want fights to be determined by that. If you told me there's a world where crit shouldn't exist in TFT, I could almost believe you. Now, the way we've mitigated this is we let crit in TFT get to some really high numbers, right? Like a simple Radiant IE, you're at 100%. A couple Executioner and a Guard Breaker or a Stride Breaker, whatever, you're at 100%, right? Like we let you get to 100% pretty quickly so that you can avoid some of that randomness and things like that. The problem is, let's say we did have some of that, those interactions, right? Let's say I'm going to make a champion. We'll call it Shaco the 1 cost. And every time his auto crits, gain 1 HP. Dumb example, but let's just use that. Well, what that basically signals to you is you must build exactly IE plus Guard Breaker plus Quicksilver or Hodge to get 100% crit so that you're not missing out on any HP, right? Any crit interactions essentially signal you must build 100% crit so that you don't miss out on that interaction, because that interaction is even more power on top of the already high crit multiplier, right? And so if you go look at the examples that you brought up of like, why haven't we had more of this? It's because, well, those itemizations became incredibly narrow. You had only one way to build them, and you must. And the other thing it makes the difference between the itemless champion and the itemized champion, we call this like the ceiling and the floor, that gap gets even wider, right? Because like, take that same Shaco and he's just there auto-attacking. He might crit, once every 4 autos if you're lucky, but put some crit items on him, and now he's gaining 4x the value because you have 100% crit. And 4x is pretty extreme. In a world where most of our multipliers are like 50%, getting a 400% output multiplier, pretty wild. So crit interactions usually incredibly narrow down the items. And the interaction with crit we already have is you do a bunch of damage, right? Like that's already a really good interaction. Does it need more on top of that? Now, all of this is to say, if a designer came to me and they built a champion that had one of these interactions, would I block it? No. No, I wouldn't. I'd let it ship. Could just be that no designer has really thought there was a cool thing there. The other thing is we have augments that would like trap you. I mean, it'd be your own fault, but like bad luck protection. Oops, can't crit now, So it just has come down to the fact that it hasn't really been a rich design space, and crit inherently has that sort of coin flippy nature unless you hit the 100% mark, which isn't great. Yeah, crit, there's a whole like design debate around the purpose of critical strikes. We were talking about this internally, and it was the fact that like critical strikes don't even feel exciting because you can hit 100%, right? Like you compare it to like a Diablo game where you start off with like a 5% crit rate. And when you get those critical strikes, it's like they hurt, right? So it's like, imagine a world where TFT was closer to, 5% critical strike. Maybe if you maxed it out, it was 25% critical strike. but instead of a 40% damage multiplier, it was a 200% damage multiplier. What would that do to the game? And it's like, well, clearly it would make it very RNG, because when you hit those crits, you're essentially getting 3 autos of value. That will clearly skew a fight. So pretty crazy there. So yeah, again, TLDR. Haven't been any because it's so coin flippy and has wide ceiling floor problems, but I haven't blocked them or anything like that. If a designer came to me with crit interactions and we shipped one, I could see it. I'm just not sure it's that rich a design space. I'm not sure the coolest crit interaction things are actually that exciting, because it just says put 3 crit items on it, done, solve the problem. You know, so. All right, there you go. We're at the 30-minute mark. I've got to end this before the mic randomly cuts out or something. Those are the questions for today. I saw there were a bunch though, so we'll get through them all this week. It'll be some good questions. Like I said, today's patch day, and then my next 3 weeks are getting ready for the curveball, which I'll talk about probably in like 2 or 3 weeks. It is happening though, so the curveball is going to be pretty wild. That's going to be some bumpy roads. One other thing to note is not this week or next week, but the week after, I actually have to fly to LA again. So will be cool to see. I'll find a way to do these walks. Oh, big truck. I'll find a way to do these walks from LA. So you'll get some LA scenery. Big truck. You'll get a way to see some LA scenery, maybe even the Riot campus. Maybe I'll do the walks at the Riot campus. But I do commit to continuing to do these. So I promise to continue. Okay, cool. That's going to do it for me. Make sure you post the questions and upvote them if you want to see them. Otherwise, I'm going to get to work. All right, that's going to do it for me. Until next time, take it easy.